of Maurice Denham, who died recently, a piece specially written for him by Peter Tinniswood and first transmitted in March 1998 to celebrate his Diamond Jubilee in broadcasting.
We present Maurice Denham in On the Whole It's Been Jolly Good by Peter Tinniswood.
"60 years I served. 60 years, and they booted me out. No ceremony, no sympathy, no soft and soothing words of comfort. Out. On your bike, Jack. 60 years of selfless service to the community, and they booted me out. I shall never forget the words they used for as long as I live. Makepeace, John Malcolm Plympton, 20,438. Walcott, Susan Margaret, 29,203. And I hereby declare the said Susan Margaret Walcott duly elected as Member of Parliament for the constituency, etc., etc., etc. And that was that. 60 years, gulped and gobbled and spat out into oblivion. She came up to me after the count, Susan Margaret Walcott. She threw her arms around my neck and gave me a scrawny kiss. She smelled of privet. She had bandy legs. She said, "No hard feelings?" "No," I said, "no." I like badgers. I adore badgers. I think it's hateful that they're constantly being run over by cars. I tried to introduce a bill to ban cars from using roads frequented by badgers. It failed. All my failures. I didn't spot the lump on Tessa's tummy. By the time I took her to the vet, it was too late. Dear Tessa. I shed a bitter tear or two the day she was put down. "Don't say put down," said my wife. "It sounds so final." "But it is final," I said. "That's the whole point." And I mustn't complain. It's been a long life. It's been a good life. Yes, on the whole, it's been jolly good. For 60 years, I've been at the heart of our dear beloved island nation's greatest triumphs and most frightful disasters. I've helped define its destiny. In its darkest hours, I've stood firm and steadfast. I remember seeing Winston, what's his name, stand up in the house and give that beast adult thingamajig the most fearful rollicking. How he spat, how his jowls quivered and his sibilance splashed and splucked. I confess I was never over fond of the creature. Too verbose, too cocky, too pompous, too shifty by half. I didn't like his manner towards me when I offered him special rates to join the House of Commons Train Spotters Society. Why? Why did they boot me out? Was it because of my chum, my companion? In the summer, he spends all his days sitting in the deck chair in the garden, drinking whiskey. I was born of parents divided by class, and, as was the case in those days, divided by gender, too. The Makepeaces were of country stock. They were lovers of raw-boned horses and haughty women. But my mother wasn't haughty. She was gentle and meek. She was kind and loving. She was a greengrocer's daughter. She showered me with the fruits of her love. "You should try for Parliament," said my wife one morning over breakfast. I said. "Yes," she said, "you." "Why?" I said. "Because it'll do you good," she said. And so I tried for Parliament, and I succeeded. My predecessor had died in a Turkish bath in somewhat mysterious circumstances. He was clutching in his hand a steam-sodden postal order for the sum of 13 shillings and fourpence issued at Dawlish Warren some 3 weeks previously. Also, there was found in his locker an unused loofah and a slim volume of erotic verse from Burma. It was all hushed up, of course. There must be no repetition of this again, Plympton, said the chairman of the constituency party during our weekly foursome on the links. He waved his niblick most furiously. What we need is a man who won't cause trouble, he said. What we need is... And then he broke off and stared at me hard. Nothing more was said. And thus, in the process of time, I was duly elected Member of Parliament. I got lost on my first day in the House, hopelessly lost. I ended up in Palace Yard. I was so excited to see daylight and breathe in fresh air once more, I dropped my front door key down a grid. The clerk of the works, or someone remarkably like him, fished it out with a bent rod. Caused quite a stir in the house. I made quite an impression. Shortly after they booted me out, I met Susan Margaret Walcott. It was a chance meeting. We'd gone up to town, my chum and I, to buy buckram and calico. We were passing by Broadcasting House when she emerged from the front doors with a man who looked remarkably like that Chamberlain fellow who mucked things up at Munich. I don't suppose it was, though. She was somewhat dishevelled. I've been stuck in the lift, she said. So have I said, bloody things. The man who installed them was shooting. She insisted on taking us for tea, my chum and I. She suggested we go to the house. I said I preferred the Ritz, so the Ritz it was. How are you getting on at the house, I said. Oh, not bad, she said. Have you had any tummy trouble yet, I said. No, she said. Oh, don't worry, I said, you soon will. It's a fearful place for tummy troubles, the Palace of Westminster. I think it explains a lot. Well, how can the members be expected to concentrate when they're forever having to run back and forth from the ablutions offices? I know I couldn't. I remember this fearfully important debate about something or other, and I spent the whole time squatting in the ablutions parlour with a copy of High Wind in Jamaica, which I read in its entirety with total disinterest. When I came out, they expected me to nationalise the whole of the British steel industry. I'm not qualified, I said. Why not, they said. Because I've been on the loo, I said. Thus are the great affairs of state so often decided. I like piers. No, not piers of the realm, seaside piers with fortune-tellers and kiosks. I like kiosks. Nothing finer in the whole wide world than a well-founded kiosk. The steam locomotives, there's something else I like. Gnashing pistons, wind-thrashed mane of steam, the thunder of the exhaust, the glow from the fire on a barren winter's night. I was found a member of the House of Commons Train Spotter Society. And that curious little chap, Clement somebody or other, used to sneak out with me at Prime Minister's Question Time to watch the King Arthur class getting up steam at Charing Cross. I think he was Prime Minister at the time, too. I rather liked him. He used to share his sandwiches with me. Oh, yes, it's been a good life. On the whole, it's been jolly good. Except, perhaps, for my dalliances and my indiscretions. I met my wife in Penzance. We were staying at the same hotel, a splendid establishment on the seafront overlooking the bay. I can't remember its name, I never could. We were in 2 single rooms, my dalliance and I. My wife was staying en pension with her family. I was filling commodities at the time. Now, my dalliance was a waitress of the corner house in Coventry Street. We emerged from our rooms only for dinner. She was a saucy little baggage, knew the ropes, kept me entertained vastly. When it was time for us to return to the capital, I decided to stay on for a day or two. I placed my dalliance on the train, and she waved to me as the train heaved and huffed away from the platform. Her hanky fluttered like a lovelorn gull. When I returned to the hotel from the station, the woman who was to be my wife was sitting on a sofa in the entrance hall, nursing a Bedlington terrier. She beckoned me to her. "I seem to have twisted my ankle. Would you be ever so kind and take Charles out for his morning walkies?" "Who's Charles?" I said. And she gave me one of those glares which were to become so familiar during all those drudging years of endless marital propinquity. Her looks were not beautiful, neither were they attractive nor elegant. No, what she had was the great merit of looking useful. And thus did I commence to court her, and thus did we marry. They didn't call me up for the war. I was ready to serve my king and country. Oh, yes, I was full of patriotic fervour. I wanted to do my share of biffing the foe. But the powers that be thought otherwise. In their wisdom, they detailed to me the role of non-competent, the same role I played for so long during my marriage. There were great scenes of drama in the house during those 5 years of total war, when, for a time of the most fearful peril, our nation stood alone against the Nazi hordes. I was having a dalliance with a lady from Matlock at the time. We used to listen to the ack-ack guns, holding hands. She was in the Ministry of Food. Back to the Ritz, and my chum and I taking tea with Susan Margaret Walcott. She didn't seem at ease with herself. Her eyes darted constantly towards my companion when she thought I wasn't looking. "My chum," I said. "Ah," she said, just like that. "Ah." I looked at her, too, but I didn't avert my eyes when she caught my glance. She seemed incommoded by the intensity of my stare. She smiled shyly. I didn't respond. I sized her up shamelessly. Her mode of dress was appalling. Her toilet was abominable, but I sensed the rascal whiff of dalliance. I sensed that squeak of the back calling in the dark. I sensed the heady sense of rumpled linen. Oh, yes, yes. She smiled shyly again. I smiled back. Walcott, Susan, Margaret, 29,203. "Are you married, my dear?" I said. "No," she said. And she blushed. Ah, I said, just like that. Ah. When I became Member of Parliament, I took gentlemen's lodgings in the region of St. James. I was done for by Mrs. Bassett. She cooked for me, cleaned my quarters and my linen. I had drawing room, dining room, study, bedroom, and the usual offices. The rent was modest and the furnishing somewhat scuffed, but it was to my liking and I was content. My wife said, "I don't expect you home at weekends except to see your constituents." So I followed her wishes. The constituency chairman said, "I don't expect to see you at weekends unless you have something to say to your constituents." I had nothing to say to the constituents, so I followed his wishes to the letter. I loved those weekends in London when Parliament was in session. I took to following the fortunes of Brentford Football Club, at times maybe quite hoarse. Mrs. Bassett made an excellent plum duff. Her lamb chops were passable, and her care of my undergarments impeccable. And she gave me all the tittle-tattle. After speaking to her, well, there was precious little reason for going to the house. I rarely spoke there, except to ask the way to the nearest urinals. I didn't like the food. The company was disagreeable in the extreme. All they talked about was war. And that's when I tried to introduce my bill about badgers. The chief whip read it carefully, and then he handed it back to me without comment and pottered off, shaking his head sadly. After the war, my wife said, if they're idiotic enough to elevate you to the peerage, be sure to let me know in good time. I don't want to be rushed changing the headed notepaper. My wife, my poor wife. She didn't tell me about her fatal illness. I think she thought I'd get in the way and steal her thunder. As she lay stricken in the cottage hospital, with the rooks cawing in the elms and the wrens serenading the ivy, her whole manner changed. She softened, her voice softened, her features softened. She took hold of my hand and said very softly, Plympton, do you remember that hotel in Penzance where we first met? Oh, yes, I said. Breakfast served in bedrooms, 6pence extra per person. Evening fire in sitting room from 5:30, 1 and 6. All electric fires by meter. And at that she sighed and she grasped my hand tightly. I looked down at her and she was smiling. She was smiling. I'd never seen her smile before. It lit up her whole face, her eyes sparkled, her skin glowed, and she was beautiful. She was a beautiful woman, a desirable woman. I bent down and kissed her on the lips. She sighed again, and she closed her eyes. The lids were as frail and fragile as a damselfly's wings. I kissed them. She sighed again, and very softly she died. And thus did our only dalliance begin and end. After the war was over, I went on a parliamentary delegation. I can't remember where. It was extremely cold, I recollect. We stayed in a hotel made entirely of wood, except for the roof, which was constructed of corrugated iron. There were dormant volcanoes in the vicinity and hot geysers. The whole place stank of fish. I can't think where it was. We were a mixed bunch, mixed of gender, mixed of party allegiance, and mixed of social and geographical background. When we boarded the plane that was to transport us to our destination, there was a distinct and all-pervasive smell of strong drink. They should have flown us by RAF, said the lady by my side in a loud, stentorian voice. When the senior steward hiccuped while serving us our soused herring and schnapps, she demanded to see the pilot. When she returned from her interview in the cockpit, she snorted angrily and said, "The man is sodden with drink, is as drunk as a skunk." I turned to her and I said, "I don't recall seeing you in the house." She snorted most fearfully and said, "I happen to be Under Secretary of State in the Ministry of Agriculture." "Oh, good for you, my dear," I said. "And which party would you happen to belong to?" She snorted again and rammed her trilby hard over her eyes. The plane bucked and bounced and heaved and wallowed. A smell of schnapps grew stronger and stronger. The steward's hiccups grew louder and louder. We landed with a series of bounds and bumps, and the tires skidded on the grass runway and threw up great clumps of sodden turf which clattered against the cabin windows. The lady in the trilby, sitting next to me, took hold of my knee with a grip like a Royal Navy stoker, and didn't relax until the cabin door was thrown open and we were instructed to disembark. The hotel staff were drunk to a man. So were our hosts when we arrived at our welcoming banquet. We dined off raw fish and porridge and drank a pale liquid that seemed to me to have been manufactured from reconstituted lightning conductors. Next morning, my lady companion of the previous day's flight beckoned me to join her at breakfast. "We might as well team up," she said. "We're the only two what can hold their drink. Did you see the state of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster last night?" "No," I said. Which one was he?" She was a very large woman. She was a vast woman who dropped her H's and slurred her diphthongs. She came from the north. She had short-cropped hair of indeterminate colour. She had a backside the size of a tram shed and bosoms like angry barrage balloons. She had a prize-fighter's jaw and a donkey man's wrists. I fell in love with her instantly. We spent most of the day visiting fish processing plants. Fearfully interesting if you like wearing gumboots. We took a trip by fishing smack. Fearfully interesting if you like the smell of dried apricots. The skipper chewed them endlessly during our voyage. The fish we caught seemed bewildered by their fate. So did I, as we chugged homeward through the still glass-eyed fjord, with the lights of the houses twinkling in the icy blackness. I took hold of the hand of the Under-Secretary of State in the Ministry of Agriculture. I stroked it. For a moment her whole body tensed. Deep growling noises emanated from the region of her vast overhanging jowls. I feared for my safety. But then suddenly she relaxed. She thrust her body into me and jammed me violently against a rusting stanchion. And then she whispered, "Tonight, wait while tonight. We'll get cracking then." And indeed we did. Oh, yes, indeed we did. I sometimes ask myself, is that why I never achieved high office? I once asked her that myself, but she growled and said, "You have with me, old lad. You have with me." In 1957, I had an attack of the burps during the Queen's speech. Memories, such memories. In 1984, I opened the door for that woman with the loud voice. I think she was the Prime Minister. But to me, she looked more like a power-mad swimming baths attendant. And there was a Welshman called Aneurin something or other, who gave the nation free arch support shortly after the war. I opened the door for him, too. He smelled of coke dust. Memories, oh, such memories. When our lot won the general election in 1950-something or other, the Under-Secretary of State in the Ministry of Agriculture lost her job. "Bugger it," she said, "I'll have to spend more time at home now." Our dalliance had prospered since those early days in the land of gumboots and cod-liver oil. Her ugliness was a ceaseless attraction to me. On our every meeting, another aspect of her foulness appeared for my delectation. Those earlobes. I could have swung on them like an orangutan. And those thighs, I wanted to roll them like a lumberjack down a mooning river. Those shoulders, I imagined wild mountain goats springing from blade to blade. I loved to watch her in action on the floor of the House. It was the only reason I attended debates. She was superb. Her voice boomed like a bittern, her eyes flashed, her jaw jutted. Those great fists beat the air. It was like watching a dreadnought sailing into battle at Scapa Flow, and yet, when we lay side by side in my bed after making love, she was tender. And she was soft. Her voice was soft, her skin was soft. She'd led a hard life in a hard city, in a hard, unforgiving, loveless region of the land. And then came the fearful day she turned to me and her eyes were full of tears. "You don't know," she said, "you don't know the half of it." I know, I said, I know. She sobbed relentlessly. Her whole body tensed and stiffened, and she ground the sheets in her massive fists. I could do nothing to help. I waited for the storms and tempests within her to abate. When they did, she got swiftly to her feet, rammed the trilby firmly on her head, hurled open the front door, and strode out into the night. We never spoke to each other again. 3 months later, she was killed. Her car crashed into a lorry that had shed its load. Makepeace, John Malcolm Plympton, 20,438. So it goes, so it goes. I met my chum on a parliamentary delegation. No, he wasn't on it. It was I who was on it. We were visiting a naval dockyard. It was winter. Gulls yapped and mewed. There was ice everywhere. Ice on the cranes, ice on the derricks, ice on the bollards, ice on the gantries. I slipped on ice on the gangplank while going aboard the frigate. I plunged head first towards the deck. I waved my arms vainly and cried out in panic. It was then that 2 firm hands took hold of me by the waist and terminated my tumble and drew me back to my feet. I was shivering both from fear and icy cold. "You all right, sir?" says this nautical voice. "We'll soon have you fit again. Why did you come and have suppers with us in a mess?" It was the voice of the man who had saved me from breaking my neck. It was the voice of the man who was to become my chum. In the early days of our marriage, when I was still in commodities, my wife insisted that we take 2 weeks' annual summer holiday. Usually the venue was Cromer, although once we went to Lake Constance. And my wife fell ill with summer flu on the 3rd day of our sojourn. Wacko, I thought to myself, time for dalliance. My wife didn't wish me to attend to her. We engaged a nurse who came from Chemnitz. She smelled of cricket bats and mayonnaise. I was left to my own devices. On the first morning of freedom, I decided to take a steamer. It was only a small steamer, not going anywhere in particular, but I had seen a woman of mature years with dark tresses and slim white ankles boarding the steamer alone. I couldn't resist it. Another dalliance, perchance. But no, it was not to be. Once on board the vessel, I discovered that my mature lady with the dark tresses and the brooding bosom had a companion. He was a small man with pince-nez and white plimsolls. I tried to imagine the 2 of them in bed together. I got as far as the bolster, but then my creative powers ran out. I ordered myself a bottle of pills and settled myself down to admire the scenery. And then I saw him. I saw this delectable youth, and I couldn't take my eyes off him. He was tall, he was slim, he was blond, and he was languid. He was attending to the ropes, absorbed in stacking them neatly. His brow furrowed in concentration, his tongue protruding and working his moist lower lip. I just couldn't keep my eyes off him. His movements were life's, his movements were lissom. I was transfixed by his beauty. I couldn't believe the feelings that welled up in my body: desire, excitement, fear, anticipation, lust. I was quaking when I disembarked from the steamer. I dared not go again. For the rest of the holiday, I contented myself with a dalliance with the nurse from Chemnitz. I'm not a man of great ambition. When I entered Parliament, I had no desire to attain high office, or even low office, come to that. I didn't want to make a nuisance of myself. I didn't want to obtrude. A few years back, the chief whip, what's his name, took me to one side and said, "Plympton, it's about time you were rewarded for all your devoted service to the cause." "What cause, I said. I saw the slight twitch to his cheek and the faint flare of his nostrils. And then he said in rather more measured tones than he'd used before, "We want to put you on a committee. What interests you most, Plympton, in what sphere?" He didn't speak to me again for 3.5 years. No, I'm not a man of ambition, but what if I were? What if I did have ambitions to hold what? Here. The state of the country is quite deplorable. There are far too many one-man buses and far too many people riding their bicycles on the pavement. Men no longer raise their caps to our womenfolk or stand to offer them their seat on the bus. Women smoke in the street and cough with their mouths open. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when you go into a pub and order a bottle of beer, you have to ask for a glass. Yeah. All is beastliness, all is frightfulness. And thus I have nothing to say to you. You are all a load of scum. Here. The constituency party wished to give me a dinner. At this dinner, they wish to present me with a token of their thanks for the 60 years I have dedicated to public service. The choice is mine. Now, what shall I choose? A mausoleum to contain the bodies of my dalliances? A gold-plated shunter's pole? The main square of Chemnitz? A steamer on Lake Constance? After we'd lunched on the frigate, the parliamentary delegation and I, we were taken on a conducted tour of the engraving dock. No, I had never seen an engraving dock before, neither have I seen one since. I have been told by those in the know that they're much of a muchness. In the evening, we were entertained to dinner in a local inn. The food was tolerable. The company was not. After the second course, I had occasion to visit the ablutions office. As I passed by the public bar, a voice called out to me. It was my rescuer on the gangplank of the frigate. He said, "You didn't come for sippers, mate." "I don't know what sippers are," I said. "I'll show you," he said. And with that he bought an exceedingly large measure of rum. So we got talking. I didn't return to the dinner. He told me of his life and his long succession of failures and disappointments. He told me of his doubts and his worries. He told me of his many and varied illnesses. He told me of his financial indiscretions and his bitter, fruitless amours. He was a squat man with teeth like spent matches. At length it was time to go. "Can I keep in touch, mate?" he said. "Yes," I said. "I don't suppose it can lead to any harm." I said that. I must have been mad. Susan Margaret Walcott, 29,203, visited me last week. I wheeled my chum out of the drawing room and into the kitchen and offered her the decanter. "Thank you," she said. She sipped at her whiskey. I looked at her without shame. She lowered her eyes. How old was she? 40, 50? She was like a chameleon seeking camouflage behind an ageless exterior. After a while, I said, "You're most welcome in my home, my dear, but may I inquire as to the purpose of your visit?" She lowered her eyes once more, and then she said, "I need your advice." "About what?" I said. She paused, and then she said even more softly, "I don't like being an MP." Silence. Neither of us spoke. I stretched out my hand and took hold of her wrist lightly. She looked up with alarm. But then she smiled. It was a pleasant smile. Oh, yes, frightfully pleasant. After they'd knighted me, they waited 2 years before I was summoned to the Chief Whip's office. Sit down, Plympton, he said. Whisky? I sat down and took a glass of his whisky. He arranged a sheaf of papers on his desk, and then he said, Plympton, how long have we known each other? I haven't the foggiest idea, old boy, I said. I saw the twitch of the cheek and the tiny throb of the pulse in the neck. He coughed. Plympton, I don't intend to beat about the bush. I've invited you here because I want you to stand down at the next election. I said nothing. I pushed my empty glass across the table to him, and he filled it with whiskey. Somewhat less sure of himself, he continued, You see, Plympton, we need younger blood in the party. We need to get that younger blood into the House. We're not popular in the country. To be quite frank with you, Plympton, I fear we could be in for the most dreadful drubbing at the next... I stood up before he could finish. I made for the door. I turned the handle, and then I spun round to face him, and I said, I once slept with the Under-Secretary of State in the Ministry of Agriculture. That's a bloody sight more than you've ever accomplished in your time in the House. And I went out and bought myself a mariner's compass. One day there was a knock at the door of my house in the constituency. I went to answer it. My chum from the naval dockyard was standing there. He was clutching hold of his kit bag for dear life. His cheeks were flushed, yet his lips were a ghastly blue. He was fighting for breath, gulping in a panic at the faint breeze. I got pains in me chest, he said. Can I come in? I helped him inside and put him to bed. For a while he slept. Then he called down demanding steamed fish and whiskey. The doctor examined him and said his heart was dicky and his constitution tired in the extreme. Don't bung me into hospital, Doc, he cried. I'll be a goner if you bung me in hospital. Let me stay here, Doc. Go on, mate, be a sport. Let me stay here. I raised my eyes to the doctor. He nodded. After he'd left, my chum chuckled and said, Right then, old mate, how about sherry and cream crackers? Why? How long has he been here? Why do I tolerate his company? No, it's not what you think. Not the German boy on the steamer at Constance. No, it was not like that with my chum. Lying festering in his bed, a sodden dimp stuck to his lower lip, his chin stubbled, his crafty eyes pink and bloodshot, his bald head glistening with sweat, his belly an all-corrupting cumulus beneath the coverlid. It was the Under-Secretary of State to the Ministry of Agriculture all over again. I had fallen under the spell of extreme ugliness. The doctor said of my chum, he'd be better off in a home. He needs a treatment, he needs expert attention. You can't give it to him. And besides, it's wearing you out. You just can't go on like this, old boy. I smiled and said, well, sooner or later, he'll probably die. Well, sometimes I think he is dead when I go into his room to take him his whiskey. You want to boot him out, said Susan Margaret Walcott, as we sat by the fire in her cottage. She was wearing those things called jeans, which showed off well the cheeks of her ample buttocks. She was wearing a stained and much darned jumper beneath which her bosoms rumpled. How old are you, Plympton? She said. I told her, and she raised her eyebrows. Why do you raise your eyebrows? I said. She said nothing. She just smiled and looked thoughtful. She poured out more whiskey. One glass for me, one glass for herself. My wife never drank strong liquor. I think it's a sign of defeat, she used to say. Everything is a sign of defeat with you, my dear, I replied. Susan Margaret Walcott poured more whiskey. How did you leave him, she said. Drunk, I said, snoring, slavering, drunk as a walrus. She stood up from her chair and came over to lie at my feet. The house, the bloody house, I hate everything about the place, she said. Its self-importance, I hate its drafts, I hate its pomposity, I hate its decadence, I hate its wheedling, cringing servants and its obsequious clerks. I hate the wigs and the pantaloons, I hate the boredom and the long, slow, ritual malice. But above all, Plympton, I hate its relentless second-ratedness. Second-rate, that's what it is. It can't even produce first-rate buffoons or first-rate rogues. Everything about it is irredeemably second-rate. Very slowly I put my hand on her head and gently ruffled her hair. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I stand here at the dispatch box to confess to you, honourable and right honourable members, that my life has not been all it should have been. Hear, hear. Shame, shame. I have deceived those I loved. I deceived my mother, I deceived my wife. I deceived the Under-Secretary of State of the Ministry of Agriculture. Shame, shame. I could have stood up for my mother against my father. I could have... No, I will not give way. I could have intervened when my father attacked her with his crop. I could have comforted her when she wept for the pain of her wounds and the hurt of her degradation. I did nothing. My wife, how did I treat my wife? With benign indifference. But am I totally guilty? Am I the only one who's treated his spouse in that manner? I look around this house and the answer is blindingly obvious. No, I am not by a long chalk. Yeah. And yet, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is no excuse. I deceived her, and that's that. When she died, she took hold of my hand and she smiled. She smiled. She looked beautiful. And as for this house, Mr. Deputy Speaker, how have I conducted myself here? I would tell you. 60 years I have spent in the Palace of Westminster, and what have I achieved? Precious little, you might say. Yeah. I think not, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'll tell you why. I have scaled the highest pinnacle of achievement that any member of this House can aspire to. I have, Mr. Deputy Speaker, done no harm. I repeat with loud and clarion call, I have done no harm. I say that with pride, I say that with passion, I say it with quiet and glowing contentment. She turned her head to me, Susan Margaret Walcott, in the firelight, in the dusk. Yes, she said. Yes, I said. I took hold of her hand. She took hold of mine. Mr. Deputy Speaker, after serving 60 years in this House, I have only one thing to say to you and to honourable and right honourable members. And it's this. It's been a good life. Oh, yes, indeed. On the whole, it's been jolly good. Hear, hear.
On the Whole, It's Been Jolly Good starred Maurice Denham. The play was written by Peter Tinniswood and directed by Enid Williams.